Hello, my name is Angel Andres Rosario Rivera, and this is my documentary of the Holocaust. I'm going to be talking about how it started, the war, the different battles that took between the wars, the Gestapo, Nazi camps, the Schutzstaffel, Hitler's rise of power, and more. So, without further ado, let's get right into it. First, let's talk about the World War II causes and effects of the Second World War. When Hitler started to invade multiple countries in his reign, Britain warned him that if he invades one more country or conquers one more piece of land, there would be a war. Apparently, Hitler didn't listen, since on September 1st, 1939, Nazi soldiers invaded Poland, and with Britain given the promise, declares war against Nazi Germany, alongside France, which gets invaded on May 10th, 1940 to June 25th, 1940 in the Battle of France, which was won by the Germans. Soon after the declaration of war, on July 10th, 1940, London hears fighter planes and bombers on the east coast, then sirens, and in the confusion, people think it's just another drill. The ground shakes rapidly. Buildings are destroyed, set on fire in seconds. Debris fly around the city of London. Large metal weird objects fall from the sky. The Germans arrive, attack Britain, hungry for territories to conquer. Now, let's talk about the different battles in the four fronts, starting with the Battle of Britain. Hitler started to invade Britain for to keep them off the war and to destroy their forces, as well as their naval ships and murder their civilians. Also to give him access in case to invade America. Black clouds fill the air and sky. Thousands of bombs drop daily and Britain is in ruin. Finally, after 3.5 long months, the German bombers retreated, leaving Britain in ruins. Over 40,000 civilians were killed. 1,250 Royal Air Force aircraft were destroyed. More than 500 British perished, and more than 2,000 airmen lost their lives. Let's talk about Pearl Harbor. This attack was the reason why the Americans joined the war against Europe and Japan, a war for the Japanese, and to end the war with two large destructive objects that killed around 80,000 Japanese. On the 7th of December 1941, hundreds of Japanese fighter planes rolled over the island of Hawaii. The attack has begun on the Americans. At the harbor were 100 ships. 8 were battleships, which were the Arizona, California, Tennessee, Nevada, Oklahoma, Maryland, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania. The Japanese made targets. Out of the 8 battleships, 6 were sunk. After these events, the US declared war against Germany and its allies, one being Japan. Now, Operation Barbarossa. This operation began on June 22nd, 1941. What was the goal? German forces invade the Soviet Union, defeat and conquer more land, making the Führer more powerful. But in the end, the entire operation became a failure. Both have 1 million men on each side, one attacking and invading the Soviets, while the other defending the motherland. After failing this operation, the war made a complete 180 degrees. Since before, the Germans were invading Europe. Now, The Allies invade Nazi-occupied countries and drive the forces back to Berlin. Operation Overlord D-Day. This operation, otherwise known as D-Day, was single-handedly the biggest invasion of the Second World War on the beaches of Nazi-occupied France. The invasion was originally planned to begin on June 4, 1944, due to bad weather, postponing it to June 6, 1944. The invaders consisted of America, Canada, Britain, Australia, Belgium, Czechoslovakia, France, the Netherlands, Greece, Poland, Norway, and New Zealand. Over 2 million men waited and most ready to burn Berlin to the ground. The beaches involved were Omaha, Utah, Gold, Sword, and Juno Beach. Omaha being by far the deadliest one of the invasion. By the end of the day, the German forces lost 200,000 men, while between the beach invaders and paratroopers, more than 200,000 men, making its infamous name D-Day. Now, the Battle of El Alamein. This battle, or should I say, the battles, took place in the deserts of North African campaign, British and Australian forces against the Afrika Corps and the German forces. The campaign began on July 1st, 1942, and ended on November 11th, 1942. This campaign was received to British arms as a win, making its very first win for the British against Nazi Germany, making it Ramos, a field marshal who became the most popular general in Germany, worst defeat. He then died on October 14, 1944, due to suicide. And for the final battle, the Battle for Castle Eta. This battle is considered what made the American and German forces allies to this day, since this battle was the very last battle to ever occur in the Second World War. This battle took place on Castle Eta, on the Austrian Alps. It began with the death of Hitler, forcing German forces to surrender to the Allies, fight until their last breath, or simply flee from Europe to South America. The castle was occupied by Germans during World War II, imprisoning various elite French political figures, which were being held at. On May 5, 1945, a German group under the command of Major Joseph Sepp Kango surrendered to a group under the command of U.S. Captain John C. Jack Lee Jr. Both teamed up and went to the castle to free the prisoners. Just then, a group of German Waffen-SS approached the castle to murder the prisoners. This battle ensued with Kango getting killed by a German Waffen-SS sniper while trying to move the French Prime Minister from danger. The battle ensued until the afternoon when the U.S. reinforcements arrived, taking German Waffen-SS prisoners. Now, let's talk about the fronts, starting with the Western Front. This front opened with D-Day to force the German soldiers out of Nazi-occupied Europe. It was opened in the first place to Stalin's demands to open a second front to push Nazi soldiers out of Europe. More than 20 nations fought against the enemy to help the British and the French resistance with their fight against the Axis. As the war ensued, Italy surrendered in 1943 thanks to the Battle of Rome. The Allies also liberated France from Nazi occupation and pushed the Germans back to Germany. Sadly, around 5.4 million men lost their lives. Now, let's talk about the Eastern Front. This front majorly took place with Germany versus the Soviet Union. After not seeing much land being conquered since British soldiers arrived on the soon-to-be Western Front, Hitler decided to break the peace treaty, the German-Soviet non-aggression pact, with Russia and invade the Soviets. During the following months, the Germans conquered massive pieces of land and were en route to the heart of Russia, Moscow. That's when the Soviet forces pushed back so fierce they weren't even fighting like soldiers, but gang members. They were fighting their guns from range, up and close, even wrestled the Germans with the knives and even hands. The Germans were pushed back from Russia, then Poland, and back to Berlin. When Hitler and his wife knew that the war would be lost, they committed suicide. The wife by poisoning and Hitler by his weapon. Around 39 million men and women and children lost their lives. Next, the Pacific. This war that took after Pearl Harbor to the end of the war, majorly between the Americans and the Japanese, was one of the most important theaters of the entire war. It took place on most of the Pacific Ocean, Southeast and East Asia, to north and south of Australia and the Aleutian Islands. Around 41.6 thousand American groups died in the Pacific campaign, while around 1 million Japanese troops. If the Japanese won the war, more deaths and massacres would occur by the Japanese Empire. And lastly, North Africa. This campaign occurred during 1940 to 1943, being fought over major strategic points such as the Suez Canal, which is critical for the British for its valuable oil reserves in the Middle East. Many countries fought in the campaign, majorly the Allies, British, Americans, and Australia, against the Axis, Germany, and Italy. Around 20 countries fought in the campaign. Around 800,000 people were killed during the North African campaign. Now, our second topic for the documentary, the Third Reich. First, let's talk about the controllers or leaders of Germany's history. So, the term Reich is a definition of an empire or kingdom. The First Reich, which is the Holy Roman Empire, which lasted from 800 to 1806, was controlled by Chancellor Otto von Bismarck. The Second Reich, the German Empire, which lasted from 1879 to 1918, was controlled by Kaiser Wilhelm II. And the Third Reich, which lasted from 1933 to 1945, was controlled by Adolf Hitler. What did Hitler establish in the Third Reich? Before his reign as the ruler of the Third Reich, President von Hindenburg named Hitler as Chancellor of Nazi Germany on January 30th, 1933, 1 year before his death. During this time, Hitler's considerable popularity among the Germans and the overwhelming support of virtually defending the Third Reich against the Soviets prevented him from developing an organized resistance to the Nazi regime. Hitler, as well as the leaders of the new government, suspended every German under civil rights. Now, let's talk about Hitler's rise of power. Adolf Hitler was appointed as Chancellor of Germany in 1933, following various people winning electoral victories by the Nazi Party. Hitler was already very popular in the country, so when the news came that became Chancellor in Germany, many people cheered and were happy that Hitler became a very powerful man and was told that he would make Germany great again. Soon, he formed and turned Germany into Nazi Germany. He began to form establishments such as the Gestapo in Nazi Germany. Soon, Hitler started to invade and conquer Europe. Britain warned him that if he invaded one more country, war would break out. And Hitler invaded Poland. So, Britain and France declared war on them. Soon after, soon after Britain declares war on Germany, so many countries get invaded, such as France, Belgium, the Netherlands, and more. While during the war, the people of Germany started to hate and dislike Hitler for his actions, his racist actions against the Jews, and more. When the war came almost to a close, he committed suicide, leaving Berlin in the ground. Now, let's talk about The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, made by William L. Shirer. The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich was a book that was written on October 17th, 1960. The book has various chapters. In the first chapter, Shirer talks about the early years of Adolf Hitler's life and how he slowly became Germany's Führer. His second chapter of the book talks about the years between the Beerholt Putsch, which is the reason that Hitler ended up in prison, to the international aggressions in 1938. In the third chapter, Shara talks in the moments that led to the Second World War, from Germany occupying Rhineland to the invasion of Poland. The fourth chapter talks about the first 2 years and a half of the war, to Nazi-occupied Poland until the German heavy losses in Stalingrad and El Alamein. As Shara said in the fifth chapter, it is probably one of the gruesome sections in the book, since it contains the murder and destruction of Jewish life in Europe, the horrors of extermination camps, the ghettos, and many other gruesome topics. It also, surprisingly, talks about the beginning of the end of the Third Reich and Hitler. In the sixth chapter, Scherer recounts the Allied victories and German losses in the final years of the war, to Hitler's final moments in his bunker. For the finale of this book, the epilogue, Scherer talks about the Nuremberg trials that followed the Second World War. Now, let's talk about the Schutzstaffel, or SS for short. The Schutzstaffel, which translates to Protective Echelon in English, was founded in 1925 and it initially served as Nazi party leader Adolf Hitler's personal guards. Heinrich Himmler soon became the head of the Schutzstaffel in 1929, and soon he expanded the group's role and size. The new recruits, they have proved that any family member or any ancestor for hundreds and hundreds of years that were non-Jews were able to join the SS. The SS has more than 250,000 members and multiple subdivisions. During the Second World War, Himmler created the Waffen SS, or Armed SS. These soldiers were chosen for being involved in mass shootings, supplying guards from Nazi concentration camps, and anti-partisan warfare. Some of these troops were specialized by murdering and brutalizing individuals in territories occupied by the Nazis. Some countries contain German, Hungarian, Romanian, and Yugoslavian forces. A Waffen-SS Sharman division, which was formed in 1944, was considered over 200,000 Frenchmen. 4 years after France became part of Nazi-occupied Europe, when 1945 rolled around and there were Soviets in Berlin, the Waffen-SS rapidly went downhill, and when both bombs were dropped on Japan, the Waffen-SS was already closed and to never be opened again. Now, let's talk about the Nazi camps. Many camps were opened around the Nazi-occupied Europe. Some of the most famous camps were Auschwitz, Dachau, Gross-Rosen, Ebersdorf, Bergen-Belsen, and more. In these camps, people would be tortured, worked to death, experimented on, and worse. Millions and millions died in these camps. Around 7.3 million Jews, 10 million Soviet civilians and soldiers, 1.8 Polish civilians, and more. Most of the deaths occurred in the Auschwitz complex, the very first Nazi camp that was opened was Dachau on March 22, 1933, which at first purpose for holding political prisoners. One of the most recognizable faces was Dr. Joseph Mengele, otherwise known as the Angel of Death. He was located in the Auschwitz death camps. At first, he was a medical doctor in the SS until he was relocated to Auschwitz by Himmler. During his stay, he experimented on children, especially twins. He would inject them multiple times until they die, try to sew twins together, throw babies onto incinerators. Keep in mind, while they were alive, and more horrific acts. After the war ended, he fled to South America, where he died of a stroke while swimming. Let's talk about the Gestapo. The Gestapo, which stands for Geheime Staatspolizei, was under the control of Heinrich Himmler, but most of its existence was ruined by Heinrich Müller. There was secret police in Nazi Germany that would hunt and follow those in Nazi Germany that were considered a threat in the country, including Jews, homosexuals, communists, spies against Nazi Germany, etc. This association was founded on April 26, 1933 in Nazi Germany, and the establishment ended on May 8, 1945. 8 days after Hitler's suicide. The Gestapo also did have the ability to do whatever they could do, such as enter people's homes without a warrant and take everything they want, including your privacy and other things against the German people's rights. Now, the Hitler Youth. The Hitler Youth was a group designed to indoctrinate kids into Hitler's ideology, send them off to war. Members of the organization were the Boy Scouts. When 1933 came along, approximately 50,000 people were part of the Hitler Youth. By the end of the year, more than 2 million. As the years went by in the 30s, many rules were taking place, such as banning children games with political movements like communism, for example. And when 1936 came along, they completely banned all youth groups, including the Boy Scouts. They were forced to be part of the Hitler Youth. All Jewish children were not allowed slash banned from ever participating in. Many children who were part of the previous youths were first isolated, then punished. The Hitler Youth started on July 4th, 1926 and ended on October 10th, 1945, with over 90% of the German children being part of the Hitler Youth. Now, let's talk about the Nuremberg race trials of 1935. The Nuremberg race trials on September 15th, 1935 was one of Hitler's first acts on Germany. Before Hitler became Chancellor of Germany, Jews were barely disrupted. But after Hitler took power, being a Jew in Nazi Germany meant hell. Jews were excluded from almost everything, like farming, radio, high-profile vocations, theater, film teaching, etc. Slowly, as time passed in Germany, fewer opportunities for the Jews became available. Signs on hotels and shops dangled saying, Jews not welcome. Relations with Jews were prohibited. They even found it almost impossible to buy medicine, groceries, drugs, etc. Bakeries, dairies, and pharmacies would let anyone relate to Jews in the shops. Thanks to Hitler's racist actions, the outside world he has seen, in the words of Britain Prime Minister Lloyd George, a great man. Now, to end this documentary, let's talk about the final solution. The final solution of the Jewish question was a meeting that various Nazi officials had, including Hermann Göring, commander of the famous Flying Saucers fighter squadron, Rainer Heydrich, who was responsible for the Einsatzgruppen Special Task Force, and Adolf Eichmann, chief of the Central Office of Jewish Immigration, in July 1941, to find out how to annihilate the Jewish people. During the first days of the war, the anti-Jewish policy escalated to imprisonment and murder. Many Jews were taken to ghettos in Poland in overcrowded, unsanitary conditions. By autumn of 1941, the SS and police introduced mobile gas vans. The function was to lock Jews inside of these vans and pump poisonous gas inside of them, killing whoever was trapped. These killing centers, which were part of the Operation Reinhardt, were located and positioned on 3 locations: Bestlech, Sobibor, and Treblinka. The SS killed tens of thousands of Jews, while the SS had the police kill about 167,000 Jews. Many killing facilities were established during the war. More than 2 million Jews died at the hands of the SS and police force, either by gas or shooting. At the end of the war, 6 million Jews perished, which were 2/3 of all Jewish population. Thank you all for watching and listening to my documentary. If you want, hit the subscribe button and the like button. I'll see you very soon.